The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with a faint, almost imperceptible hum, its vast, circular room filled with the murmurs of representatives from across the galaxy. 7 species, each vastly superior in technology and military prowess to humanity, crowded the space. Alien beings with long, sinuous limbs, bioluminescent skin, and eyes that gleamed with centuries of knowledge. At the center of the room stood a human diplomat, Ambassador Jack Hawk, facing a council that had already made up its mind about his species. The council's stance on humanity was clear: Earth was a fragile, emotional species, incapable of standing up to the harsh realities of the galaxy. They had entered the Galactic Council not because of their power or influence, but because of the strategic necessity of keeping Earth's systems in check. The thought of humanity fighting a war, especially against a species as formidable as the Vrax, seemed absurd to the representatives. "We are sympathetic to your situation, Ambassador," began one of the council members, a tall, insectoid being with sharp mandibles, "but your species has shown time and again that you have a tendency to avoid conflict at all costs. You fear war, and fear makes you weak. You are unfit to defend your colonies from a threat like the Vrax." Jack Hawk remained standing, his posture straight and unyielding. He was a seasoned diplomat, a former military officer who had seen the horrors of war and understood its consequences better than most. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the scornful looks of the council members. The words stung, but Jack had a plan. He had known this moment would come. Humanity's greatest strength, he realized, was not in its ability to fight wars, but in its ability to avoid them, to find alternative solutions that others never considered. "You misunderstand us," Jack said, his voice steady, unwavering. "We don't fear war. We understand it. We understand it better than any of you." The room fell silent, the council members exchanging curious glances. This was not the response they had expected. "We've lived through the consequences of war on our home planet," Jack continued, his eyes sweeping over the faces of the council members. "Human history is full of wars, some we won, some we lost, but every time we survived. And we learned. We learned that the cost of conflict is far higher than what most species are willing to pay. We learned that victory means nothing if it comes at the cost of everything you've built. And because of that, we've built a culture that avoids war at all costs. Not because we are afraid, but because we've seen the aftermath of unnecessary destruction." A low chuckle rippled through the chamber. The members of the council didn't understand. They saw humanity's reluctance as weakness, a flaw. To them, it was laughable. How could a species that feared war possibly survive in such a brutal galaxy? "The Vrax are coming for us," Jack continued, his gaze sharp, as though to challenge their doubts. "They believe we are weak, that we will fold before them. But we will not." His tone turned cold. "And we will not ask for your help, either." The words sent a ripple of surprise through the room. The Vrax, a race of conquerors known for their ruthlessness, had been threatening humanity's colonies for weeks. Despite their technological superiority, humanity had yet to fall to them. They were a species made to survive, tacticians, negotiators, survivors. Yet the council had made it clear that they did not believe humanity had the strength to withstand such a mighty foe. "Your colonies will burn if you do not act now," one of the council members, a hulking being with elongated arms and sharp claws, growled. "Your fleets are nothing compared to the Vrax warships. You cannot defend yourselves alone." Jack leaned forward slightly, his voice low but intense. "You're right. We don't have the strength to beat them head-on. But we don't need to. I have a plan to deal with the Vrax. A plan that doesn't involve a single direct engagement with their forces." The council remained silent, their interest piqued. Jack had their attention now, though they were still skeptical. He continued, his voice steady and confident, recounting a history that stretched back centuries. "We humans have faced invaders before," Jack said, his eyes never leaving the faces of the council members. "We've faced wars, famine, and destruction. But we survived. We outwitted invaders much stronger than us. We've learned to use our minds and our adaptability to win, not through brute force, but through tactics that exploit our enemies' weaknesses. I know you doubt us. You laugh at our so-called fear of war. But you underestimate us. That fear is what makes us different. We understand that war is the last resort. And when it's absolutely necessary, we will fight. But we will fight smart. We will fight in ways you cannot predict. The insectoid representative narrowed his mandibles, clearly unimpressed. You expect us to believe that you can outsmart the Vracs? They are a military force unlike anything you've encountered. You have nothing to match them. Jack met his gaze without flinching. That's where you're wrong. We have something the Vracs don't have, creativity. We've learned to adapt. We've developed strategies that make us unpredictable. And more importantly, we know how to manipulate our enemy's perceptions. We understand fear, not just our own, but theirs. The room fell into tense silence. The council members exchanged glances, some curious, others still mocking. But Jack's words had begun to plant seeds of doubt in their minds. Perhaps humanity wasn't as helpless as they had believed. Let me show you, Jack said, pulling out a holographic display. It projected a detailed map of the human colonies, highlighting the most vulnerable points along the Vracs' expected path. This is where the Vracs are heading. But what they don't know is that we've already anticipated their movements. We've set up decoys, we've hacked their communications, and we've spread misinformation. The Vracs think we're unprepared, but they don't realize that we've been preparing for this day long before they made their move. We've studied them, we know their tactics, and we're already one step ahead. The council watched in silence as Jack demonstrated the depth of humanity's preparations, an intricate network of covert operations, subterfuge, and psychological manipulation that the Vracs would never expect. You want proof? Jack continued, his tone unwavering. I'm not asking for your armies, your fleets, or your soldiers. I'm asking for your trust. Let us handle this. We will protect ourselves, and we will make the Vracs regret ever underestimating us. The council was silent for a long moment. The insectoid representative spoke first, his voice filled with grudging respect. You are not what I expected, human. Perhaps we have underestimated you. But the Vracs. We will handle them, Jack interrupted firmly. And when we're done, we won't just have defended ourselves. We'll have taught the Vracs something they'll never forget. Humanity may fear war, but we know how to win without fighting. The tension in the chamber thickened. The council had been mocking humanity, but now, the seeds of doubt were taking root. Jack's calm, collected confidence was disarming. He wasn't begging for help. He wasn't pleading. He was offering a solution that might just work. And that, more than anything, unnerved them. They hadn't expected humanity to be this resourceful. They hadn't expected humanity to be this dangerous. And as they stared at the human diplomat, they began to realize that perhaps the greatest weapon humanity had wasn't its military might, but its ability to surprise, to adapt, and to never, ever back down. Jack Hawk wasn't just fighting for Earth. He was fighting for humanity's place in the galaxy. And the council was starting to understand that maybe, just maybe, humanity was far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Jack Hawk stood before the Galactic Council, an unwavering figure in a room full of mocking alien species. The council members, in their towering, gleaming forms, exchanged glances, unimpressed by his calm demeanor. The Vracs were coming. They were real, they were dangerous, and humanity was the next target. The council had already made it clear that they would not intervene. They didn't believe humanity stood a chance. They believed humanity's reluctance to engage in war made them weak, their pacifism a vulnerability that would lead to their swift defeat. Jack's task was not only to convince them of humanity's ability to survive, but to prove that humanity had something the Vracs didn't expect, a mind capable of outwitting and outlasting their enemies. The council's ridicule had only sharpened his resolve. Let me be clear, Jack said, cutting through the mutterings. We do not fear war. We fear its consequences, but we do not shy away from conflict when it is forced upon us. Your assumptions about us are flawed, and I intend to show you why. The council's laughter died down. There was something in Jack's words, his tone, that made them pause. The insectoid representative, the one who had mocked humanity the most, narrowed his eyes. You seem certain. But what makes you think you can defeat the Vrax? They are a force unlike anything your species has encountered. Jack didn't flinch. He had heard these arguments before. The Vrax were ruthless conquerors, known across the galaxy for their brutal tactics and superior weaponry. But Jack had a different perspective, one that didn't focus on brute strength. You focus too much on power. Yes, the Vrax are technologically advanced. Yes, their military might is overwhelming. But the Vrax have one glaring weakness. They underestimate their enemies, especially humans. The room fell silent as Jack began to outline humanity's approach, one that didn't rely on matching the Vrax blow for blow, but on using their intelligence, adaptability, and resourcefulness to level the playing field. We don't fight like you do, Jack continued. We think before we strike. We find weaknesses. We infiltrate. We deceive. We outsmart. The Vrax think we are weak because we don't flaunt our weapons, because we don't march into battle with an army. But we've been preparing for this for years. We've developed strategies that you won't see coming. The council members exchanged wary glances. They had no idea what Jack was talking about, but something in his words made them listen. Jack could see the cracks forming in their skepticism. You're saying you'll win with tactics alone? The reptilian council member, a towering figure with scaled skin and glowing eyes, leaned forward. Against the Vrax? How? Exactly, Jack responded. We're not trying to win by brute force. That's the mistake the Vrax are about to make. We've already started planting false intelligence within their ranks. Their commanders think we're preparing for an all-out defense. In reality, we're laying traps. Our greatest weapon isn't our fleet, it's our ability to manipulate perceptions. He could see the skepticism turning into something else, a flicker of interest, maybe even doubt. Jack pressed on, outlining a plan that hinged not on direct confrontation but on psychological warfare. We know the Vrax value strength above all else. They see any sign of weakness as an invitation to attack. But they also have a prideful arrogance that makes them blind to the truth. Our strategy is simple: deceive them, mislead them, and keep them guessing. Jack paused for effect, letting the words sink in. We will feed them false information, make them believe we are gathering forces where we're not, and when they engage, we will be ready. Our forces will hit them where they least expect it: weak points in their supply chains, sabotage of their communications, distractions that pull them in different directions. We've already infiltrated key Vrax positions. One of the council members, a tall being with an elongated neck, scowled. You would rely on deception alone? How can you expect that to work? The Vrax will catch on quickly. Jack didn't hesitate. That's where you're wrong. The Vrax think they know everything about their enemies. They think they can crush us without effort. But they can't predict how we think. They won't see the traps we've set. We are not afraid of war. We understand it, and we know that the key to survival is to make your enemy doubt everything they know about you. Let them think we are weak. Let them think we are easy prey. The insectoid representative cocked his head, clearly intrigued but still skeptical. You think this will be enough to stop them? Jack's expression hardened. Not just stop them. We will make them regret ever underestimating us. We will teach them that fear isn't always a weakness. It's a tool. And we wield it better than they ever could. He saw their doubts, their skepticism, but there was a shift in the air. The mocking tone had left their voices, replaced by curiosity. Jack knew the Vrax would fall into his trap. They always did. The human ability to deceive, to adapt, to manipulate, was a weapon far more powerful than any military might. The council was slowly coming around to that realization. You talk of adaptability, said the reptilian representative. But your tactics will need more than just deception. You will need an army, a fleet. Jack shook his head. You're still thinking like the Vrax. We don't need an army to fight the Vraks. We have something far more powerful, the ability to think outside the box, to improvise, to use the very weaknesses they exploit against them. Our forces are not just soldiers, they are tacticians, spies, engineers, and strategists. We have already begun our counteroffensive. We know where they will strike, and will be waiting for them, in places they never thought to look. The insectoid representative leaned back, his mandibles twitching as he processed Jack's words. You believe you can defeat them with nothing more than deception and subterfuge? We will do more than that, Jack said, his voice firm. We will make the Vraks doubt everything they think they know about us. We will turn their confidence against them. And when they are at their most vulnerable, we will strike. The council chamber was silent, the weight of Jack's words hanging in the air. They hadn't expected humanity to think this way, to approach war not as a last resort, but as a battlefield of perception. Jack's plan wasn't one of overwhelming force. It was one of intelligence, adaptability, and the human instinct to survive against impossible odds. After what felt like an eternity, the insectoid representative broke the silence. Very well, Ambassador. We will watch. We will see if your plan works. But make no mistake, if you fail, you will face the consequences alone. Jack nodded, his gaze unwavering. We will not fail. As the council members whispered among themselves, Jack knew this was only the beginning. The real battle had yet to come. But humanity had already proven one thing: they would never be underestimated again. The Vraks would soon learn that humanity's true strength didn't lie in their armies or their weapons, it lay in their minds, their adaptability, and their relentless will to survive. And in that, the Vraks would find their defeat. The moment Jack Hawk left the council chamber, he knew the hardest part of his mission was just beginning. The council had reluctantly agreed to watch humanity's strategy unfold, but their approval meant little. The real test was what would happen next, the success or failure of his plan to deceive the Vraks and turn the tide of war in humanity's favor. He couldn't afford to fail. The stakes were too high. Within hours, Jack was back in the operations room aboard his ship, surrounded by a team of the best and brightest human tacticians, engineers, and spies, men and women who had been preparing for this moment in secret for years. The Vraks had underestimated humanity's capacity for strategic thinking, and now, Jack was about to show them why that was a fatal mistake. Status report, Jack barked as he walked into the dimly lit room. One of the officers, Lieutenant Juno, a sharp-minded strategist, immediately stepped forward. We've already begun implementing Phase 1 of the plan, Ambassador. The Vraks are taking the bait. Their scouts have picked up false intel on our fleet's position, and they're starting to move toward the decoy systems. The false signals we planted are pulling them exactly where we want them. Jack nodded, satisfaction flickering in his eyes. The Vraks would think they had cornered humanity, but in reality, they were walking straight into a trap. Humanity's tactics weren't based on brute force, they were about precision, misinformation, and patience. The Vraks, with all their advanced technology, were blinded by their overconfidence. What about the Vraks command ship? Any sign of them reacting to our countermeasures? Lieutenant Juno hesitated for a moment before responding. They're still too focused on the decoys to realize what's happening. We've got their communications scrambled, and their fleet is divided. The command ship's position is still unknown to us, but we have multiple operatives infiltrating their systems to relay intel. The Vraks think they're about to deal a fatal blow to us, but they don't know we've already infiltrated their fleet's command structure. Jack's mind raced. The Vraks were a dangerous enemy, but they had one fatal flaw: their over-reliance on their own strength. They believed they were invincible, and that arrogance made them predictable. By keeping them in the dark, Jack's team could exploit that weakness. They didn't need to face the Vraks head-on, they just had to keep them guessing. We need to hit them before they regroup, Jack said, his voice low but urgent. We'll turn their own pride against them. Send in the elite teams. Phase 2 begins now. The operations room shifted into overdrive. The elite strike teams, composed of human soldiers who had been handpicked for their exceptional abilities in guerrilla tactics, psychological warfare, and infiltration, were already on standby. They had spent months preparing for this moment, and now, it was time to see if humanity's unique approach to warfare would be enough to hold off an empire like the Vrax. Jack's team had spent weeks planting false intelligence in Vrax communications. They had embedded agents inside Vrax supply chains, feeding misinformation that would lead their enemies into traps. And now, those traps were about to be sprung. The Vrax fleet, divided by false signals and faulty intel, would be picked apart one by one. "Commander Lee, the primary target is their fleet's logistical hub," Jack ordered, turning to one of his most trusted commanders. "Take it down quietly. Disable their supply lines before they realize what's happening." "Understood, sir," Lee replied, his voice a calm contrast to the storm brewing in the room. "We'll hit them hard and fast. They won't know what hit them." The strike teams launched their operation, silently infiltrating Vrax supply ships and logistical hubs under the cover of darkness. The Vrax, confident in their superiority, had left key points vulnerable, and now, humanity was exploiting those vulnerabilities with surgical precision. As Jack monitored the progress from the operations room, he couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. This wasn't a traditional military campaign. There were no grand battles, no overwhelming forces, no space battles fought with the roar of weapons. Instead, humanity was using its greatest strength, its mind, to outwit an enemy that thought it had already won. The minutes stretched into hours. The team was relentless, hitting Vrax outposts, sabotaging supply lines, and disrupting communications. Every move was calculated, every action designed to further destabilize the Vrax's overconfidence. The Vrax had underestimated the humans, and now they were paying the price. The communications officer, Commander Ilya, spoke up. "Sir, we've intercepted a message from the Vrax High Command. They're panicking. They think the attack on the logistical hub is a prelude to a full-scale assault. They're reinforcing their positions, splitting their forces even further." Jack's lips curled into a tight smile. "Good. Let them split up. The more they divide their forces, the easier it will be to pick them off one by one." Another report came in, this time from Lieutenant Juno. "Sir, our intelligence on the Vrax command ship is solid. We have a team infiltrating their systems. Once we have control of their communications, we can disable their fleet's coordination completely." "Perfect," Jack replied. "We're almost there. We'll have them at our mercy before they even know what hit them." As the operation unfolded, Jack remained calm, his mind calculating every possible move the Vrax might make. He had learned long ago that the key to victory wasn't in brute force, but in understanding your enemy. The Vrax were strong, yes. But they were predictable. They thought they could crush humanity, just as countless invaders had before them. But they hadn't counted on humanity's adaptability, its ingenuity, and its ability to turn the tables when it mattered most. The Vrax were playing right into their hands. At the same time, Jack knew they couldn't afford to get too comfortable. There were still risks, still unknowns, and if the Vrax realized they were being manipulated, they could strike back with vengeance. The teams were working at lightning speed, but every minute that passed brought them closer to the Vrax realizing what was happening. Suddenly, a new message blinked on Jack's console. It was from his lead infiltrator aboard the Vrax command ship. "We have control of their communications," the message read. "They're in chaos. Their fleet is scattered and disorganized. They have no idea what's happening." Jack's eyes narrowed. "This is it. They've walked into our trap." With the Vrax disoriented and their command structure in chaos, humanity was poised for the final blow. Jack stood at the center of the operations room, his heart pounding with anticipation. The Vrax were no longer an unstoppable force. They were a fractured, confused army, unsure of how to respond to an enemy that had outsmarted them at every turn. Jack spoke, his voice resolute. "It's time to end this. Send the signal. The final phase begins now." The trap had been set. The Vrax were already on the defensive, and now it was time for humanity to show the galaxy just how deadly they could be. They hadn't needed overwhelming strength, superior numbers, or even advanced weaponry. All they needed was the will to survive, and the ability to outthink their enemy. The Vrax had underestimated humanity, and now they were about to learn the price of that mistake. As the final phase of the operation began, Jack Hawk stood by the main console, watching the data stream in. Every nerve in his body was alive with anticipation. Humanity had already executed the first two phases flawlessly, manipulating the Vrax into a position of vulnerability. The false intel had worked perfectly. The strike teams had hit their targets, sowing chaos and confusion throughout the Vrax fleet. Now, it was time for the final act, the part of the plan that would either prove humanity's mastery of tactics or result in catastrophic failure. But Jack had no doubt. The Vrax, in their arrogance, had overlooked one simple truth: humanity had been fighting this battle long before the first shot had been fired. They had already won. The Vrax just didn't know it yet. Phase 3 is live, Lieutenant Juno said, her voice breaking the silence. We've initiated the full-scale cyber attack on their fleet's control systems. The Vrax command ship is offline. They're scrambling to regain control, but their systems are falling apart. Jack nodded, eyes scanning the live feed of the Vrax fleet's movements. The Vrax, once organized and powerful, were now in disarray. The fractured communications and sabotaged systems had crippled their ability to coordinate. Their fleet was scattered, their supply lines in chaos. And now, with the final piece of the puzzle in place, Jack was about to deliver the finishing blow. Send the signal, Jack ordered. Activate the EMP drones. Let's shut them down for good. The EMP drones were a key part of humanity's strategy. They were small, unassuming, and carried no weapons. Their sole purpose was to disable the Vrax's advanced electronics. With the EMP drones deployed, Jack knew the Vrax wouldn't have a chance to recover. They relied too heavily on their technology, and now that technology would be their downfall. Moments later, Jack received the confirmation. EMP drones deployed. The Vrax fleet is without power. They're completely blind and unable to defend themselves. The Vrax, once so confident in their technological superiority, were now helpless. Their ships were floating, dead in space, their weapon systems useless, their communication channels silenced. The human forces had achieved complete dominance without firing a single shot. It was a masterpiece of strategy. But even as Jack stood victorious in his mind, he couldn't help but feel a pang of caution. The Vrax weren't completely defeated yet. They still had the capacity for desperation, for brutality. They might not have the upper hand anymore, but that didn't mean they would just give up. Proceed with the final phase, Jack ordered, his voice unwavering. Activate the human strike teams. It's time for the Vrax to understand the price of underestimating us. As the human forces began their final assault, Jack's mind raced through the plan. The EMP drones had crippled the Vrax's ships, but it was the human teams on the ground and aboard the enemy ships that would make sure the victory was absolute. The elite soldiers, trained for these kinds of high-stakes operations, moved swiftly, infiltrating the now powerless Vrax vessels. The Vrax, panicked and disorganized, were no match for the precision and speed of the human forces. Jack had one final piece of the puzzle in mind. The Vrax needed to know that their defeat wasn't a fluke. It wasn't some stroke of luck. It was the result of careful planning, precision, and human ingenuity. They needed to see, firsthand, how humanity had outplayed them at every turn. Jack's final order came in the form of a recorded message, broadcast across the Vrax fleet. "This is Ambassador Jack Hawk of the United Earth Coalition," his voice rang out, calm yet unwavering. "To the Vrax who are still listening, consider this a lesson. Underestimating humanity is not just a mistake, it's a fatal one. We may not fight your way, but we will fight smarter. You will remember this day, and the price of your arrogance." As the broadcast played, Jack's words resonated across the fleet. The Vrax commanders, defeated and humiliated, were left with no way to save face. Their pride had led them to overlook humanity's greatest asset, the ability to turn the tide of war through intelligence and resolve, rather than sheer strength. The final reports came in, confirming the success of the operation. The Vrak's command ship, once the symbol of their military might, had been neutralized. The scattered fleet was in disarray, unable to mount any coordinated defense. The human teams had taken control of key ships, their sabotage and infiltration techniques proving to be more effective than anyone had expected. The Vraks were now a disorganized mess, their forces scattered and crippled. Jack allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction before turning his attention back to the task at hand. Prepare the fleet to regroup. We'll need to follow up and ensure the Vraks can never pose a threat to humanity again. The success of the operation was not just military, it was ideological. Humanity had proven that it didn't need overwhelming numbers, superior technology, or massive firepower to win. It had won with tactics, strategy, and an unwavering belief in its own resilience. The Vraks had fallen because they had assumed that the human fear of war would make them weak. They hadn't counted on humanity's ability to think, to adapt, and to outmaneuver their enemies. As Jack stood in the operations room, watching the final reports roll in, he knew that this victory would change everything. The Galactic Council had watched, skeptically at first, but now they had witnessed the proof. Humanity was not just another species to be brushed aside. They were a force to be reckoned with, capable of shaping the galaxy in ways the more powerful species could not even imagine. The victory over the Vraks was more than just a tactical triumph. It was a message to every species in the galaxy: humanity would no longer be underestimated. They had proven that fear, when wielded strategically, could be just as powerful as any weapon. And they had shown the universe that their true strength lay not in their armies, but in their ability to outthink, outlast, and ultimately, prevail. Jack Hawk stood tall, his face a picture of quiet resolve. The war was far from over, but humanity had just secured its place among the stars. And for the Vraks, it was too late to turn back. They had learned their lesson the hard way: never, ever underestimate humanity.